So now we're going to take you directly into one of these instance spaces. The place that we're taking today is known as the Pergus Power Station. And this is one of these private instances I've described where we've controlled the variables much more tightly than we do out in the battlefields. The battlefields are where you'll see, hundreds if not thousands of other players working with you to take and hold territory in a very dynamic way. And these instance spaces we use for much more detailed storytelling and to challenge you with much more detailed puzzles. In the case of the Pergus Power Station, the story is something like this. Pergus was actually built by the Bane forces as a main power generation source for all of their defenses in this area of Forius. And so if the player groups can get inside of Pergus here and manage to take this, basically a fusion reactor, offline, that will defeat the enemy's resistance, or at least put a major hole in the enemy's defenses in this entire region of the map. So it's a major strategic objective, and we're going to go see how well Paul can pull it off here for us today. As Paul moves into Pergus, one of the first things he's encountered here is this set of security cameras. In this particular case, he was smart. He got to see it from a reasonably distant range, and he was smart enough to take that out before we went around the corner. If that security camera had seen him, that would have set off a variety of alarms, which would have made the entry into this space considerably more difficult. Also in here, he had just gotten a little peek around that corner there he saw another group of humans that were entrapped in this prison cell. That, in our story, was a group that was sent in ahead of you, trying to accomplish the same mission, but unfortunately had failed. But the good news is that they're still alive, as opposed to having been just wiped out. And so there's a little side mission here that if Paul can manage to find a way to rescue these individuals, they will join Paul on trying to take over this facility. And in fact, Paul's going to utilize their skill here a little bit later. So Paul's now going to work his way down to what we might call the command center of this facility. And in that command center, he might be able to find a way to remotely release that other squad from that prison cell. You'll also see here in front of Paul is a series of this red laser beams. What those are is, in fact, he just ran through one of those. He just triggered off another set of alarms. And unfortunately, that means in this next section of the map, he's actually going to be faced with a bit tougher opponents. If he had been careful to avoid those, he might have avoided this particular difficulty for this section. Paul's using a variety of weapons and special abilities, by the way, too, on his journey here today. You'll notice that Tabula Rasa has a much more streamlined user interface than you might expect to see in a lot of other MMOs. You can see, for example, down here on the left, there is an indication of what weapon he's using that he can scroll through and select one out of a variety of weapons. And attached to his right mouse button, there is which ability he might use. And again, he's got a key that he can just scroll through which of the abilities he might choose to engage. But also across the rest of the UI, you see a little mini map in the bottom right, a little radar map, a little piece of UI here in the upper right that helps him track his missions. In the upper left, you see his text log, chat log, and down at the bottom left, you see just a little indication of kind of his personal statistics. And if we were traveling with a party, you might also see some of their attributes as well. The creature that Paul is peeking around here to see right now is known as a linker. That linker has an attack where it builds up a very strong charge and then finally will launch that attack at Paul. But linkers are very difficult to hurt while they're charging up or during their attack, but they're quite weak for a brief window of time after they've attacked. And so the best way to deal with a linker is to observe that charge and discharge behavior to make sure you're well out of the way during the discharge, then rush in after it has made its attack and kill it before it stands back up again when it's at its weakest. You'll notice for this particular laser barrier, that's an alarm barrier there again. In this case, he can't really sneak through that one very well. But experienced players will figure out that there's sometimes a way that you can get through these without just walking through it. And in this case, he destroyed a piece of machinery there that was operating those laser doors, or that laser barrier. And so he's managed to sneak through there without setting off any alarms. So now we're getting deeper into the control rooms of this facility, and so Paul is searching for a particular control room that happens to have the proper set of equipment and switches necessary to open up that prison block where that other group has been captured. You can see in here also there are remote cameras that will show him the visuals into the rest of this base, which might be used strategically to his advantage. But up here is where we'll find the equipment that Paul has been looking for that will let him release that group of prisoners. You notice Paul just used what we call a critical kill, where each of the weapon damage types has the ability to cause a critical hit and invoke a very special death procedure or animation based upon that damage type. So you can freeze a creature and then shatter them into little bits. You can catch things on fire and turn them into charcoal. Or you can use your sonic attacks to blow them into little tiny pieces. All kinds of fun critical kills, we call them. So Paul is using the equipment here in this control room to look through remote cameras and eventually find the switches necessary to release those prisoners. So now that Paul has released those prisoners, they've deployed here into the control room, and they will not only hold this against the future enemy attempts to retake it, but just as importantly, they can now remotely operate the same equipment to open a variety of the passages that will allow Paul to move more freely through the base. So with this now well in place, we're going to head deeper into the base and try to find our way into the fusion reaction chamber itself to try to take it offline. So Paul has actually now activated the enemy waypoint system. And so these teleporters that he's now using normally would only operate for the enemy, but he's managed to change their coding in a way where now they'll function for him and other humans as well. So we're now looking through a remote camera where we're able to see these, this hallway where there is an energy buildup and discharge. This is foreshadowing that if Paul ever finds this corridor while he's walking around, he wouldn't want to be in the corridor at the time that that electrical discharge takes place, or that will hurt, you might say. Here's that energy corridor we were talking about. So Paul is actually waiting here just outside the corridor to time his movement through the corridor correctly. And he's set himself up the ability we call sprint, so that once the energy discharge has gone by, he can make it all the way to the end of the corridor without getting overrun by that energy dispersal. And in the end, here's where we found ourselves, is here truly now in right in the presence of the fusion reaction itself. But beyond just finding this chamber, which I think is a fairly nice, impressive scene unto itself, the real trick here is we've got to find a way to shut this thing down. As it turns out, the process of shutting it down is fairly sophisticated, especially if the way we want it shut down is to implode and overload that will cause the destruction of this whole facility. And so Paul's now going to try to find his way down to the ground level, the third floor down, in order to begin to take offline some of those components. So we've now found our way down to the reactor core chamber, and in here is where we'll find the machinery that we can shut down to stop the fueling of the reactor. Get a nice little panoramic view of the reaction chamber itself, and miraculously that is so well magnetically contained that it's actually safe for us to stand here in this proximity. And there's one of the reactor fuel pumps that has to be taken offline. We've already taken out one. There's 4 of them down here. There's 2 that are now offline, and you can see the fuel beginning to spill out of that reactor process. There's 3 down. And then finally, here's the 4th one. Let's see if we can take it offline too. 4th reactor's offline. So now we just have to find our way back up into the control room and initiate the destruct sequence. So now that we're back up in the control room, we just need to find the computer to enter the destruct sequence. You'll notice that we're still using a variety of weapons, everything from shotguns and rifles through electromagnetic pulse weapons that take down their shields. We've also been deploying special independent turrets that kind of automatically defend themselves on their own. And then here is the final location where if we just press this one button and scooch over here to get a good view, we'll see the reactor chamber there beginning to implode, and fortunately we're in a pretty strongly defended little bunker here. But sure enough, there it goes. There, the reactor has now been destroyed, and you can begin to see the building coming crashing down around us. We're getting the congratulatory statement for completing this particular mission, and it's time for us to flee the building before it comes and collapses down around our shoulders.